The 1970s gave us some of the greatest muscle cars ever built, but it also gave us some of the ugliest disasters ever to roll off an assembly line. Today, we're counting down 10 of the ugliest American cars of the 1970s. Classic car fails that made you wonder what the designers were thinking. If you love classic cars, the good, the bad, and the downright ugly, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our deep dives into automotive history. Let's get started, because this is going to get ugly. Let's start with the Ford Pinto, a car so infamous that its name became synonymous with automotive disaster. Now, the Pinto's biggest problem wasn't just that it looked like a roller skate that got stretched in the microwave. It was also known for, occasionally exploding when rear-ended. But we're here to talk about looks, and boy, were they bad. The Ford Pinto had all the visual appeal of a doorstop with wheels. That awkward hatchback design made it look like Ford ran out of sheet metal halfway through and just said, "Hey, close enough." The front end was bland. The proportions were all wrong, and the whole thing looked like it was designed by a committee that hated each other. Ford sold millions of these ugly classic cars, which just proves that Americans in the 70s were either desperate or had terrible taste. Possibly both. The Pinto was cheap, it was practical, and it looked exactly like what you'd expect from a car that cost less than a decent used lawnmower. The Ford Pinto remains one of the most notorious American cars ever made. And not just because of its safety problems. It was ugly, and everyone knew it. The AMC Pacer. The first wide, small car. AMC's marketing team really thought that was a selling point. The Pacer looked like a fishbowl on wheels, and that's being generous. AMC's idea was to give drivers better visibility with massive amounts of glass. What they actually created was a car that made you feel like a goldfish in a pet store, constantly on display for everyone to gawk at. The proportions were all wrong. It was wide but short, giving it a squashed, bloated appearance. The rear end looked like someone took a cake frosting spatula and just gave up halfway through. And those taillights? They looked like they belonged on a kitchen appliance, not a car. The AMC Pacer got even uglier in 1978 when AMC decided to cram a V8 under the hood, requiring a bulging hood and a ridiculous stand-up grille. It was like putting a toupee on a bald guy. It didn't help, and everyone could tell you were trying too hard. The Pacer was poorly conceived, poorly executed, and proof that sometimes being different isn't better. It's just different and ugly. Drop a comment below if you remember seeing one of these AMC Pacers on the road, or if you were unfortunate enough to own one. We want to hear your horror stories. The Ford Mustang II is a controversial car in classic American automotive history. Some people argue it saved the Mustang nameplate during the fuel crisis. Others argue it was automotive blasphemy. We're firmly in the second camp. Sure, the base Mustang II was small and looked a bit silly, but the real visual offense was the Ghia model. Ford decided that what the Mustang really needed was a luxury makeover, complete with opera windows, a padded vinyl roof, and color-keyed bumpers. Opera windows on a Mustang. Let that sink in. It was one thing to shrink the Mustang down to subcompact size. It was quite another to dress it up like a miniature Lincoln Continental and pretend it was sophisticated. The Mustang du Siècle, Ghia, looked like Ford took a perfectly mediocre small car and tried to make it fancy by gluing on parts from the parts bin. And those hubcaps? Yeah, they were lifted straight from the Granada. Ford didn't even try to hide it. The Mustang II sold well, but we're pretty sure that was in spite of the Ghia, not because of it. Sometimes less is more, and sometimes opera windows on a muscle car are just a bad idea. The Chevy Vega was already a problematic car, unreliable, rust-prone, and about as exciting as watching paint dry. But the Kammback wagon version took things to a whole new level of ugly. The Kammback design was supposed to be aerodynamic, inspired by German engineer Willibald Kamm's theories about reducing drag. What Chevy actually created was a car that looked like someone took a hatchback, cut off the rear end with a hacksaw, and called it a day. The abrupt, chopped-off rear end gave the Vega Kammback a truncated, unfinished appearance. It looked like Chevy ran out of money, time, or both, and just shipped it anyway. The proportions were awkward, the styling was bizarre, and the whole thing screamed, "We gave up." To make matters worse, the Chevrolet Vega was notorious for rusting faster than you could say undercoating. So not only was it ugly, it was also falling apart before your eyes. The Vega Kammback was proof that aerodynamic theory doesn't always translate to attractive design. Sometimes it just translates to, "What the hell is that?" This is definitely one of the worst American cars of the 1970s. And that's saying something. AMC had a talent for building cars that looked unique. And by unique, we mean weird. The 1974 AMC Matador Coupe was AMC's attempt at a personal luxury car, and it was a swing and a miss. The Matador Coupe had a bulbous, bloated body that looked like it was melting in the sun. The front end was awkward, with a drooping grille that seemed to be sliding off the car. The rear end was even worse, with a fastback roofline that didn't quite work, and taillights that looked like an afterthought. AMC was trying to compete with cars like the Monte Carlo and the Grand Prix, but the Matador looked more like a science experiment gone wrong. It was big, it was heavy, and it was ugly in a way that's hard to put into words. The AMC Matador Coupe sold poorly, which is no surprise. When your car looks like it's having an allergic reaction to itself, people tend to shop elsewhere. AMC eventually gave up on the Matador, and honestly, we can't blame them. Some ideas just don't work, no matter how hard you try. This classic car fail proves that even established manufacturers can miss the mark. If you're enjoying this trip down memory lane, or should we say, this trip down nightmare lane, smash that like button to let us know. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our next deep dive into automotive history. Now, this one is controversial in the world of classic American cars. Some people love the boat-tail Riviera. Some people think it's a work of art. We think it's ugly, and we're not afraid to say it. The 1971-73 Buick Riviera featured a dramatic boat-tail rear end that was supposed to evoke classic coach-built cars and speedboats. What it actually evoked was confusion and horror. The rear end was so exaggerated, so over the top, that it looked like a caricature of a car. From certain angles, the boat-tail Riviera looked interesting. From most angles, it looked like someone welded two different cars together and hoped nobody would notice. The proportions were bizarre, the execution was questionable, and the whole thing just didn't work. Buick was trying to be bold and daring with this vintage American automobile, and we respect that. But sometimes bold and daring just means ugly. The boat-tail Riviera is proof that not every design risk pays off. Sales dropped significantly when the boat-tail debuted, and Buick quickly replaced it with a more conventional design. Lesson learned: sometimes conventional is better. Let us know in the comments. Do you think the boat-tail Riviera is a masterpiece or a mistake? We want to hear your take on this controversial classic car. The Chevy Monza was GM's attempt to build a sporty subcompact, and for the most part, it was fine. Not great, but fine, except for the Town Coupe version, which was absolutely hideous. The Town Coupe featured a formal roofline with, you guessed it, opera windows. Because apparently, GM thought every car in the 70s needed opera windows, whether it made sense or not. The Chevrolet Monza Town Coupe looked like someone took a sporty hatchback and tried to turn it into a miniature luxury car by adding a vinyl roof and some fake chrome. The result was awkward, confused, and just plain ugly. The proportions were all wrong. The formal roof didn't match the sporty body. The opera windows looked ridiculous, and the whole thing screamed, "We have no idea what we're doing." The Monza Town Coupe sold poorly, and it's not hard to see why. When your car looks like an identity crisis on wheels, people tend to look elsewhere. GM eventually dropped the Town Coupe, and the world became a slightly less ugly place. This is definitely one of those classic car disasters we'd rather forget. Dodge's attempt at a personal luxury coupe was the Magnum XE, and it was a disaster in every way that mattered. The 1978 Dodge Magnum XE was based on the Dodge Charger platform, but you'd never know it. Dodge took a perfectly decent mid-size platform and turned it into a bloated, overwrought mess with a formal roofline, hidden headlights, and enough fake luxury touches to make a Cadillac blush. The front end featured a massive crosshair grille that looked like it belonged on a truck, not a luxury coupe. The hidden headlights added unnecessary complexity and frequently broke. The formal roofline made the car look top-heavy and awkward, and the whole thing was just wrong. Dodge was trying to compete with the Monte Carlo and the Grand Prix, but the Magnum XE looked like a parts bin special that nobody asked for. It was too big, too heavy, too ugly, and too expensive. Sales were predictably terrible, and Dodge killed the Magnum after just a few years. Good riddance. This is one of the worst cars of the 70s, and it deserves its spot on this list. The Lincoln Versailles was badge engineering at its absolute worst. Ford took a Mercury Monarch, which was itself a rebadged Ford Granada, slapped a Lincoln grille on it, added some fake luxury touches, and charged nearly twice as much. The result was a car that looked exactly like what it was, a cheap Ford wearing a tuxedo and hoping nobody would notice. The 1979 Lincoln Versailles was supposed to compete with the Cadillac Seville, which was a genuinely attractive and well-executed car. The Versailles, by comparison, looked like a Granada with delusions of grandeur. The proportions were awkward, the styling was bland, and the whole thing reeked of corporate cynicism. Lincoln charged luxury prices for a car that was fundamentally a budget sedan, with leather seats and a nicer grille. Buyers weren't fooled, and sales were dismal. The Versailles was proof that you can't just slap a fancy badge on a mediocre car and call it luxury. Well, you can, but people will laugh at you. This classic car fail is a textbook example of what not to do. We're almost at number 1. Stick around to see the ugliest American car of the 1970s. Trust us, you won't believe it. The number 1 spot goes to a car so ugly, it defies explanation. And here we are. Number 1. The ugliest American car of the 1970s. The 1974 Chevrolet Laguna S-3. Now, the Laguna S-3 wasn't just ugly. It was aggressively, offensively ugly in a way that's hard to comprehend. Chevy took the Chevelle Laguna and decided what it really needed was a body-colored urethane front end that looked like a giant plastic nose. And what a nose it was! The Chevrolet Laguna S3's front end was massive, bulbous, and completely out of proportion with the rest of the car. It looked like the car was wearing a giant foam rubber bumper, which, in a way, it was. The urethane front end was supposed to meet new federal bumper regulations while maintaining a sleek appearance. What Chevy actually created was a car that looked like it had been in a fight and lost. The rest of the car wasn't much better. The formal roofline didn't match the sporty pretensions. The proportions were awkward, and the whole thing just looked wrong. The Laguna S3 sold poorly, and it's not hard to see why. When your car looks like it's wearing a Halloween costume, people tend to shop elsewhere. Chevy eventually dropped the Laguna name, and the world became a slightly less ugly place. This is, without a doubt, one of the ugliest muscle cars ever made, and it takes the top spot on our list of the worst American cars of the 1970s. The 1970s were a tough time for the American auto industry. Fuel crises, emissions regulations, safety standards, and changing tastes forced manufacturers to adapt quickly. And not every adaptation was successful. These 10 cars represent the low points, the moments when cost-cutting, panic, and questionable design decisions combined to create automotive disasters that we're still talking about decades later. But here's the thing, we love them anyway, because even the ugly cars have stories, even the disasters have character, and even the biggest failures remind us of a time when American cars were bold, daring, and willing to take risks, even if those risks didn't always pay off. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this countdown of the ugliest classic American cars, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into automotive history.